In this video, we'll cover how to read a data file into Enso, how to parse data inside of a data set in order to clean it up, and how to identify and remove duplicate values from a data set. To start, we have our input file here, and we can drag that directly from Windows Explorer right onto the Enso canvas. We can now click the preview icon, which will show us our data, and we can see that this is actually a semicolon delimited file. So we can specify the format here as delimited and change our delimiter from the default of a comma to a semicolon. We'll now see that our data has been split out into the correct columns, and the headers have automatically been applied for us. Next, we can take a look at our data set, and a few things stand out when looking at this data. The first is that our date time field is a valid date, but it does not line up with what Enso recognizes as a date, so we'll need to do some conversion here in order to be able to use that downstream. The second is that inside of our transaction amount field, there's a few values that have non-numeric values inside of them. So those are corrupted in some way, and we want to do something about that. In this case, we'd like to remove those values entirely so that there isn't any risk that they'll crop up later on in our process. To do that, we're going to use the parse method, and we can drag out a new node here. I can start typing in, and our component browser will automatically filter down to the methods that it thinks we might be using. And I can select parse. Here we can pick a column. We'll pick transaction amount to start, and we can change our type. We want this to be a float, which is a numeric type that contains decimals. So we'll pick that, and Enso will do what we ask, but it will report a warning here that a number of cells had an invalid format for that type. That's expected. We actually want it to remove those invalid formats from our data set, so we can actually change on problems to ignore, which will suppress that warning and allow us to continue moving forward, since that's our expected behavior in this case. We can take another look at the data set, and if we scroll down, we'll see that those values have been replaced with an empty value or nothing, which is exactly what we want. We want to be able to identify all of these downstream, and we don't want any text values showing up, and we want to be able to perform math on the good data that we do have for this field. Next, we'll convert our date time field, and to do that, we'll again connect a new parse method. We can select our column, transaction date time, and change our type, this time to a date time. Out of the box, Enso supports a number of different formats for date times. But none of these are going to be exactly what we're looking for in this particular case, so we'll just pick one and change it manually ourselves. Here we can specify the day, the month, then the year, and then hours and minutes. And if we open up our preview window again, we will see that our date time field has been converted over to an Enso date time, which we can now use for whatever we want to do later, whether that's comparison, date math, anything like that. Next, we'll move on to identifying and removing duplicates. And to do that, I'll drag in a new node and use the aggregate method to start. In this particular data set, I know that we expect to only see one record per transaction ID. And if more than one record shows up with any given transaction ID, we want to completely remove those from the data set, since that indicates that there was a problem with the data. And rather than trying to identify which one is correct, we just don't want either of those records to show up. So we will specify our group by, which is transaction ID. And then in columns, we can click the plus, and it will add in aggregate column count by default, which is what we want in this case. But to show you a little bit, there are a number of other functions that are also supported, like minimum, maximum, first or last value, average, sum, etc. Next, we can filter our data set. Here we'll pick a column that we want to filter on. We are going to filter on our count, and we're going to filter for cases where we have a count greater than 1. So we can select the filter type of greater, and then enter a number value, and type in 1 here. If we look at the data preview, you'll see that we have 10 rows with a count greater than 1, so 10 transaction IDs that showed up as duplicates, and about 25 records in total when we look at that count. We no longer need our count field, so we can use remove columns in order to get rid of it. Now, to use that to remove those transactions from our data set, we're going to bring in a join. We can then connect our duplicate transaction IDs as the right-hand side of this join. And we can perform a exclusive left join, which means that we only want records where they do not appear on the right-hand side. And we will join on our transaction ID. Now let's take a quick look at what our data set had for records before and what it has now. Before, we had a bit over 1 million, but importantly ended at 575 rows. And after looking at the data preview, we've removed 25 records, which is about what we expected. And so those duplicate transactions have been successfully removed. I hope that this video was helpful in your journey, and have a great day.